Okay guys, so just a quick look at anaerobic respiration for a bit of revision. So just a reminder that I've put up there, anaerobic means respiration without oxygen. Aerobic respiration requires oxygen because it's essential for the electron transport chain, but we can have anaerobic respiration continue without oxygen, which is basically just glycolysis continuing. So I'm going to put there, when not enough oxygen can be supplied, anaerobic respiration happens, producing small amounts of ATP. And that is far less efficient than aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration is simply glycolysis with a few extra steps afterwards. So it's only producing 2 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose. Whereas aerobic respiration, when the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain happen, produces 34 to 36 molecules of ATP. So it's far less efficient, but it does still provide a bit of ATP for the organism. So that's why it's helpful. So basically, well, before I show you that, what happens is glycolysis still happens. So glucose still breaks down, and it breaks down into pyruvate. Now that pyruvate cannot enter the mitochondria like it normally would. So the pyruvate must then be broken down through fermentation. And in animals, that fermentation produces lactic acid, and in yeast and plants, that fermentation produces ethanol and carbon dioxide. Okay, so really, we can sum those equations up like that. So for animals, glucose turns into lactic acid through pyruvate fermentation, producing 2 ATP molecules from ADP and phosphate. And very similar for plants, glucose turns into ethanol and carbon dioxide, producing 2 ATP in the process, and that happens through pyruvate fermentation as well. So like I say, that fermentation happens because without it, pyruvate would continually build up in the cytosol, which wouldn't be any good for the cell. So yeah, we need to get rid of it, and that's what fermentation does. Just a couple of tips about VCAR from what I've seen from analysing some past questions. Anaerobic questions are quite often asked subtly, so they don't directly say that the question is about anaerobic respiration. They might give you some information that's hinted at it being anaerobic respiration. They might say, for example, that ethanol is being produced. They might say that lactate or lactic acid is being produced. They might be talking about oxygen levels dropping in the environment. So look out for those clues. Any of those things happening would indicate that anaerobic respiration might be happening. The oxygen one, make sure that oxygen levels are getting really low. But if oxygen levels are really low, then that would be indicating that anaerobic respiration would be becoming more likely. And I'll just put a note there at the bottom dot point. Remember that carbon dioxide is always produced in aerobic respiration and is also produced in anaerobic respiration for yeast and plants. So carbon dioxide levels going up don't necessarily mean that it's anaerobic respiration, but it could be. And I've just shown here, remember that ATP levels dropping, or rather rising at a smaller level, are a good indicator. So what I've got is going up the line here, I've got quite sharp increases, and that's supposed to be indicating aerobic respiration when large amounts of ATP are produced. But then at this point here, it is still rising, but it's rising really, really slowly. That's supposed to be indicating that anaerobic respiration is happening. So it's still producing ATP, but at a far, far lower level. Okay, so that's the basics of anaerobic respiration. It's pretty simple. Just get the idea that the glucose ultimately breaks down into lactic acid in animals or into ethanol and carbon dioxide in plants and fungi. That produces 2 ATP. And that the products are produced, i.e. the lactic acid and the ethanol are produced because the pyruvate must be fermented. I guess another final point, just remember that's all happening in the cytosol of the cell, just like glycolysis does when we look at these stages of aerobic respiration, and that is everything. Okay.